At my own graduation party, the night I was supposed to celebrate my biggest achievement, I caught my father doing something so dark, so unthinkable, that I had only two choices: expose him or let someone else take the fall. What happened next changed my family forever. Graduation. The word alone was supposed to taste sweet. A finish line, a celebration, a moment where the years of sleepless nights and aching hands finally meant something. But as I stood in the glow of the ballroom chandeliers that night, with laughter and music echoing around me, the sweetness was gone. Because of them, my parents, the very people who should have been clapping the loudest, smiling the widest, cheering until their throats hurt. Instead, their eyes cut through me like glass. Their smiles weren't warm. They were sharp. I could feel it before I even heard the first whisper. "You think you've earned this?" My mother hissed, her lips barely moving as she leaned in close enough for me to smell the bitterness of her wine. "You're nothing but a leech," my father added, his voice low, steady, dripping with contempt. The room spun for a second, not because of the champagne flute trembling in my hand, but because I had heard those words before. Leech, burden, mistake. They had been echoing in my head for years, but tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be mine. The dean had shaken my hand earlier that afternoon. My name had echoed across the hall, and the cap and gown still sat folded neatly in the corner of my hotel room. I had made it, against all odds, against every whispered doubt. But standing in the middle of my own graduation party, I realized the battle wasn't over. It had only shifted, because when my parents slipped past the crowd of laughing classmates, their hands brushing mine as they pressed another glass into my grip, I felt it. Something was wrong. The glass was heavier, the scent sharper, and for the first time that night, I hesitated. "Drink." My mother's voice was velvet and venom at once. "For us." Her smile glowed in the golden light of the ballroom, but her eyes betrayed her. They weren't smiling. They were waiting. I lifted the glass halfway to my lips. The bubbles fizzed against the rim. My friends were across the room, laughing, posing for photos, oblivious. The music swelled, a perfect cover. And in that split second, when everything in me screamed not to take a sip, I remembered something important. I had been preparing for this moment all along, not for graduation, for survival. Because what my parents didn't know was that I'd been watching them as closely as they had been watching me. Every jab, every cruel laugh, every time they made me doubt my worth, I had been filing it away. Quietly, patiently. And tonight, in the place where they thought they'd finally break me, I would show them something they never saw coming. I set the glass back on the table without a word, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. Across the room, the giant projector flickered to life, ready for the slideshow of my academic journey that my classmates had prepared. Pictures, videos, memories all lined up for everyone to see. But that's not what played. No. What played instead was something I had arranged weeks ago, in case tonight turned ugly. And as the first image appeared on the screen, my parents' confident smirks faltered, because their whispers weren't private anymore. They were about to hear their own voices, the hissed insults, the cruel laughter, the plans whispered when they thought no one was listening. Tonight, my graduation wouldn't just be about a degree. It would be about freedom. And I was ready. I thought maybe I had misheard them. Maybe they didn't really say it like that. Maybe leech was just in my head. But then, as the chatter of the party swirled around me, I caught it again. Hissed like venom. Just a leech. It came from my father's lips, muttered low to my mother, who nodded without hesitation, her eyes narrowing like I was a stranger, not their child. I froze mid-step. My diploma certificate, the one I had framed with my own money, suddenly felt heavy in my hands, like it was mocking me. The truth is, I wasn't supposed to hear them. Parents don't usually announce their contempt out loud, not in public, not at their daughter's graduation party. But they had grown careless, confident that their whispers blended into the laughter and clinking glasses. They thought no one was listening, but I was. I slipped behind a pillar, watching. My aunt, the one who had always favored my parents' side in every family fight, leaned in close to them. "She doesn't even know what's coming," she smirked. My stomach nodded. What was coming? I forced myself to walk toward the buffet table, trying to mask my trembling hands. That's when I saw it. My drink poured and waiting for me at the end of the table. My father stood nearby, his hand hovering just a second too long over the rim of the glass before he stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks with that fake, practiced smile he always used when others were watching. No one else noticed, but I did. The faint shimmer of powder sinking into the liquid. The swirl of something unnatural at the bottom. My throat went dry. I didn't touch the glass. Instead, I grabbed a napkin, faked a sneeze, and slipped the drink to the side as though I had accidentally brushed past it. I needed time. I needed proof. As the crowd cheered for me to say a few words, I plastered on a smile, my heart hammering in my chest. Thank you, I began, forcing my voice steady, for being here tonight. This moment isn't just about me. It's about the journey, the struggles, the sacrifices. The irony burned in my throat, because in that moment, I realized my biggest struggle wasn't school. It wasn't bills. It wasn't working 2 jobs to get here. It was surviving my own parents. Halfway through my little speech, my mother's eyes met mine. Cold, calculating. And then I knew, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. They had planned this. But why? Later, I slipped into the kitchen where my childhood friend, Emily, was helping with trays. She'd been by my side since middle school, the one who always believed in me when my parents called me lazy or ungrateful. Emily, I whispered, grabbing her arm, don't let me drink anything tonight. Please, watch my back. Her brows furrowed. Why? What happened? I couldn't bring myself to say the word poison. Not yet. Just trust me, I said. My voice cracked. She nodded without question. That's the kind of friend she was. Back in the main hall, I moved carefully. I switched plates with strangers, swapped glasses when no one was looking. Every move felt like walking a tightrope. I was hyper-aware of every detail. My father's watch ticking, my mother's forced laughter, the way my aunt's gaze flicked toward me every few seconds. And then it happened again. My father casually picked up another glass of wine by mistake. He made a show of sniffing it, then set it down on the table near me, sliding it subtly closer like he was offering me a gift. Proud of you, kiddo, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, his arm patting my shoulder stiffly. But his eyes told a different story. I didn't take the glass. Not this time, not ever. Instead, I decided something else. If they wanted to play this game, I'd let them think I was still playing too. That's when the plan formed in my mind. I wasn't just going to survive the night. I was going to turn it around. If they thought I was a leech, I would show them what happens when the so-called leech refuses to die quietly. But before I could set anything in motion, something else hit me, a bigger, darker truth. What if tonight wasn't just about humiliation? What if it wasn't just a cruel whisper behind my back? What if my parents truly wanted me gone? The question rattled in my chest. My stomach churned. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought the whole room could hear it. And as I looked across the room, seeing the people I thought I could call family laughing, smiling, raising glasses in my honor, I realized something bone deep and horrifying. I wasn't safe. Not here. Not with them. I straightened my back, clutching the edges of my diploma like a shield. If they wanted a performance, I'd give them one. But they had no idea, absolutely no idea, that I was already rewriting the script. Because before this night ended, the truth would spill. And not the kind they were planning. I sat in the sterile hospital room, staring at the Ford drip as if it held answers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every beep of the monitor reminded me how close I'd come to never waking up. But the real storm wasn't in my body, it was in my mind. Why would parents do this? My parents. The people who were supposed to protect me, guide me, celebrate me on what should have been the proudest night of my life. Instead, I'd heard the venom in their voices, seen the sneer on their faces, felt the poison burn its way through my body. You're just a leech. Those words haunted me more than the near death itself. A nurse poked her head in and gave me a gentle smile. You're lucky, she said softly. Another few minutes and, well, you're a fighter. I nodded, but inside I felt numb. Was it luck? Or had fate been cruel, keeping me alive only to face the horror of what my parents had done? As the nurse left, I replayed everything in my head. The way my mother's hand shook just slightly when she handed me that glass. The way my father's eyes darted to hers, as if confirming something. It wasn't just a cruel outburst. It was planned. And if they had gone this far once, what was stopping them from trying again? For the first time in my life, I was afraid to go home. By the next morning, the hospital insisted someone come to pick me up. They couldn't keep me without reason, and besides, I was technically an adult. My phone buzzed with missed calls. From Mom, from Dad, dozens of them. Each voicemail was the same. Come home, honey. It was just a misunderstanding. We're sorry. But all I could hear underneath was the hiss of Leech. When they finally arrived at the hospital, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't look at them without imagining what they'd done. See, my mother whispered to the nurse. She's exhausted. We'll take her home now. But my fingers tightened around the blanket. My gut screamed at me. If I left with them, I wouldn't be safe. So I spoke up. For the first time in my life, I defied them. No, I said flatly, staring straight at the nurse. I'm not going home with them. The room went still. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face twitched into a brittle smile. Sweetheart, don't be dramatic, she cooed, her voice sugar-laced poison. Of course you're coming home. But the nurse stepped in. She's an adult. It's her choice. The look my father shot me then, it wasn't disappointment. It wasn't even anger. It was warning, like I was a problem that needed to be fixed. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. My parents didn't love me. They saw me as a burden, a liability, maybe even a mistake. And they were willing to erase that mistake permanently. I refused to leave with them. The hospital discharged me anyway, but I didn't walk out those doors alone. I called the only... She showed up within the hour, her arms wrapping around me in the kind of embrace I had always wished my parents would give me. You don't have to go back there, she whispered. Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to. Tears finally broke through. Not because I was sad, but because for once I felt safe. But safety didn't erase the fear. Because I knew one thing for certain, my parents weren't done. The poisoned glass at my graduation party had been their first move. What came next? I didn't know yet, but I was about to find out. And when I did, I wouldn't just survive. I'd make sure they never had the power to hurt me again. The whispers of my parents' betrayal never left me. They echoed in every quiet corner of my mind, rattling me awake at night and trailing behind me during the day. You're just a leech. End it tonight. Those words clung to me like smoke, suffocating and impossible to escape. But I wasn't going to crumble. Not anymore. When I walked back into my tiny apartment after leaving the hospital, the bitterness in my throat wasn't just from the remnants of the poison, it was from the realization that my own parents had decided I wasn't worth keeping alive. And yet, I still wanted to see them one last time. Not as a daughter begging for love, but as a woman ready to face the truth. 2 days later, I called them. My voice was calm, steady, as though I hadn't almost died because of them. Can we talk? Just us, I asked. There was a long pause before my mother finally said, fine. Come by tomorrow evening. No warmth. No hesitation either. It was almost as if they were daring me to walk back into their den. The next day, I stood outside their home. The same house where I had once celebrated birthdays with balloons and cake, where I had rehearsed speeches for school plays, where I had imagined they were proud of me. Now it felt like a crime scene. I rang the doorbell. My father opened the door. His eyes flicked over me with that same coldness I'd grown up with. You survived, he said flatly. Not I'm glad you're okay. Not we were so worried. Just you survived. That was all I needed to hear to know this meeting wasn't about reconciliation. It was about exposure. We sat in the living room. I kept my bag on my lap, my phone recording quietly. I know what you did, I began. My mother crossed her arms. What are you talking about? The drink. The whispering. The way you looked at each other before I collapsed. You wanted me gone. Their silence was damning. My father didn't even bother pretending. You were a burden, he said, voice sharp. like he was finally unloading the truth he'd been holding for years. My chest tightened. Even expecting it, the words sliced me. "You think you're special because you finished college?" my mother sneered. "All you ever did was drain us. You never brought anything back. You'll always be a leech." The word hit harder now than it had that night. But this time, I didn't break. I leaned forward, steady and deliberate. "Then why did you bother raising me at all?" My father laughed bitterly. "Because people would have asked questions if we hadn't." The casual cruelty in his voice chilled me more than the poison ever had. I should have walked out right then. But something in me needed to keep going, to drag the rod into the light. "You think you can erase me? That if I'm gone, you can pretend I never existed." My voice trembled, but it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. "Well, I'm not going anywhere." My mother's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe you? You've always been dramatic. Weak. No one listens to the weak." That's when I pulled out my phone, set it on the table, and hit play. Their voices filled the room, the recording from my hospital bed, the moment I had woken just long enough to catch their whispered plan on my phone's microphone. "You're just a leech. End it tonight." The sound of their betrayal replayed in their own living room, echoing off the walls. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. "You recorded us?" my father hissed. "You tried to kill me," I shot back. "You think I wouldn't protect myself?" Silence stretched, heavy and venomous. Finally, my mother's composure cracked. Her face twisted with something ugly, desperate. "You'll regret this," she spat. Maybe I would. Maybe the weight of exposing them would crush me. But in that moment, I knew the truth. They could no longer control me. I stood up, pocketed my phone, and looked at them one last time. "I came here to give you a chance to admit what you did. You chose to double down. Now, everyone will know what kind of people you really are." Their faces went pale. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of that house with my head high, leaving the chains of their cruelty behind me. Back in my apartment, I sat on my bed, shaking. The recording was proof. But proof wasn't enough. Not yet. I opened my laptop, uploaded the audio, and sent it to a lawyer I'd contacted through a friend. Someone who specialized in cases of family abuse and attempted harm. Then I saved a copy for myself, hidden, encrypted, untouchable. If my parents wanted to erase me, they were about to find out I wasn't so easy to silence. But even as I hit send, my chest felt heavy, because exposing them wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. And revenge, I knew, could be dangerous if I let it consume me. Still, as I stared at the glowing screen, I whispered to myself the words I never thought I'd believe. They don't own me. Not anymore. But I couldn't shake the question that haunted me, twisting like a knife in my gut. If they could poison their own daughter, what else were they capable of? The weeks that followed my graduation were a blur of legal paperwork, whispered warnings, and sleepless nights. My parents thought they could silence me forever, but what they didn't know was that their betrayal had forged me into someone unrecognizable, someone who no longer feared them. I was officially working with a private investigator, a lawyer, and the university's dean. Every detail of that night was being documented. The untouched champagne glass that tested positive for poison. The hushed phone call where my father bragged to a relative about teaching me a final lesson. And the testimony from the waitress who swore she saw my mother stirring something into my drink. It was no longer just my word against theirs. For the first time in my life, the truth was stacking up in my favor. But truth doesn't erase pain. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's hand pushing the glass toward me. My father's sneer as he called me a leech. The laughter of guests who thought the insult was just a cruel joke. I wasn't their child anymore. I was their prey. And yet, even knowing that, some part of me still wanted to understand. To ask them why. So one night, against everyone's advice, I drove back to my childhood home. I sat outside in my car, staring at the dark windows, remembering every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation card with their signatures at the bottom. Finally, I went in. The air smelled like old carpet and fading perfume. My mother was in the kitchen, humming like nothing had ever happened. My father was in his armchair, scrolling on his phone. They looked up at me as though I was an intruder, not their daughter. "You shouldn't be here," my father said flatly. I laughed, though my throat was burning. You tried to kill me. Don't I deserve an explanation? My mother's face flickered, a shadow of guilt, maybe, or just annoyance. You never appreciated us. You took and gave nothing back. You were always a disappointment. Her words cut deeper than the poison ever could. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to beg them to love me just once. But instead, I stood tall. No, I whispered. I was your child. And you poisoned me because I refused to live my life under your control. For a moment, silence filled the house. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked away. And that was when I finally realized there would never be an explanation that made sense. They did it because they could. The trial came faster than I expected. Headlines splashed across the news. Parents charged in poisoning plot against daughter at graduation party. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, whispering about greed, control, and betrayal. Inside, I sat alone on the witness stand, my voice shaking as I recounted every moment of that night. But this time, my trembling didn't come from fear. It came from strength. The jury heard the recordings. They saw the lab results. They listened to the waitress. And in the end, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. My parents were sentenced. I watched them being led away in handcuffs, my mother's eyes wet, my father's jaw clenched. For a second, I thought I might break. But then a wave of freedom washed over me. They had taken so much from me: love, security, family. But they couldn't take my future. And that was when I decided I wasn't going to let their cruelty define me. Today, I stand on my own. I've started speaking publicly about toxic families, about survival, about how sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who wound you deepest. I've connected with strangers who've lived through the same pain, and together, we've built something my parents could never destroy: a chosen family. Do I wish things had been different? Every day. Do I still grieve the parents I thought I had? Of course. But I survived their poison, and not just the kind in a glass. I survived the poison of their words, their manipulation, their cruelty. And in surviving, I became something stronger than they ever imagined. Unbreakable,